So why does net worth skyrocket after you get your second rental property?
So I feel like your second rental property is that turning point, right? Because now you have 2 properties under your belt that are getting passive cash flow. Because when you first start to buy rental property, it seems overwhelming.
It is overwhelming.
Especially that first one, right? Because all the money that you have to save for that down payment has to come from you either putting in more hours, getting a second job, or cutting back and saving.
Plus, you've never done it before, so anything new always has a little bit of stress and anxiety to it.
Yeah, and it takes a while to either work or save to get the first property. So you might be thinking, okay, how does somebody have 10 properties? How does someone have 20 properties if it takes me, 3 or 5 years to save for my first property? But what you don't understand is this passive income makes it easier and easier to save. Once you get your second one, the second one's a little easier than the first one because you might have, $300 or $400 passively coming in a month from that first property. But once you get that second one, let's say they're each $400, that's $800 a month you have just coming in fully passive. And so that is a turning point when you're investing in these rental properties. For me, it took me 5 years to get my first rental. It took me 4 years to get the second one. And then the third one I got in 2 years because of this passive income. And then the fourth and the fifth, I each got a year apart. So as you can see, it's compounding real estate, really.
It is compounding real estate. Yeah, and the first one's always the most difficult. And then you're like, oh, okay, that wasn't so hard. Mm-hmm. So then the second one, and I watched you go through the third and the fourth and the fifth one. All of a sudden, you started getting on people's lists. You started getting deal flow. You started figuring out how to buy the next one. You started to look at cash flow, and you were actually looking at a fair amount of deals after your second one.
Absolutely. You also get better at it, right? Because you've done it twice. So now you know what you're looking for, the area you're looking for, very more specifically, what features you want in the home and how to do the math to make sure that it cash flows.
Right. And I think the biggest thing for me to watch with you was your whole mindset change. In the beginning, you were like, okay, this is going to be hard. I got to use my own money. I got to save all this. And then you started to realize that your tenants actually pay all these off.
Right. And they actually help you with that passive income and help you, so you can refinance and cash out some of the debt. And now I have 5, and I'm also now looking at, for a 6th one, more of a creative option, right? I'm looking at possibly doing something sub 2 or possibly doing something with affordable housing. So it's kind of fun as you start traditional and then you start to get creative. But it's after that second rental. So for those of you out there that have, 0 or 1 rentals, just know once you get to that second one, your net worth and also your knowledge is just going to explode.
If you're a business owner looking to scale your business, then you need to take a look at Limitless this year, which is going to be in Dallas, Texas, August 29th to the 31st. We all know things are changing and there's a lot of chaos in the markets. You want to be here because there's 50 speakers and a lot of thought leaders coming to this event. If you're interested, just click on the link below.
So for those of you that are sitting there wanting to get your first rental, I think, you need to start by either saving money and cutting expenses or working an extra job. People believe homeownership is out of reach for them based on inflation and their salary. So it's going to take either cutting or making more money in order to save up for that first rental.
And the other thing is I think that you can easily, even if you don't have money, you can go out and start to look at some markets and you can start to underwrite deals and see if they cash flow or not, even if you don't have the money, because just that is practice. So I know Danille started to do that after her second and third. She started to get deals in it, and all the time she would go, I found another one. And then she would underwrite it, or we go look at it, and all of a sudden we're like, no, pass. But that process, in other words, you're continually looking, even now, you're continually looking for things. And sometimes they look better online. Sometimes they don't look great online, and those turn out to be the best ones yet.
And also, if you don't have any money, there's so many people out there with money with no time. Right now, we're at a conference, and I was talking to a girl, and she's a research scientist, and she's a high W-2 employee, and she has a rental. She wants another rental, but in this market, it's hard to find cash flowing deals, and she doesn't have time to look for them, right? So if you find someone like that and partner with someone like that, they can cut you in on a deal you find for them because there's so many people that have the money and don't have the time.
Yeah, and then there was another person that we met, and she was in a market that was super expensive. The rents were high, the homes prices were high, And she found a little niche in the Airbnb furnished 350, 400 square foot market. And she was getting $1,700 a month for 350 square feet. And that's in a market that is not affordable. So she was able to do that creatively when all the other traditional options ran out.
Right, because what she realized is, yes, this house doesn't cash flow if I buy it, but if I put a tiny home on it and do an Airbnb plus rent out the home, then it does cash flow.
Right. So there's lots of ways to skin the cat. So a lot of people see me now today with 10,000 apartments and a big company behind me and all this momentum. But I can assure you that I started exactly where a lot of people started. I started with a 2-bedroom, 2-bath that cash flowed just barely $100 a month, and I used my own money. And that's where a lot of people start. Most people think that you need a whole bunch of savings to do this. The hardest part is actually a deal, right? Mm-hmm. It's not the money. A lot of people use the money as the obstacle, but it's always the deal. So my experience has been, once I started sourcing and looking for deals, whether it's an Airbnb or whether it's a tiny home or whether it's 1 week rentals or 1 month rentals or 3 month rentals or long-term traditional rental, it doesn't really matter. They all cash flow differently. So it's always what you see. So as you start to get educated and you start to understand that there's a lot of ways to cash flow real estate and there's a lot of directions you can go, then your mind opens up and you start to see things very, very differently. So I didn't buy my first rental, my first cash flowing rental, till I was in my late 20s. I was managing properties all this time where all these people were getting rich because I was the manager putting renters in those properties. So for years, I just sat on the sidelines and watched. And then one day, I decided to do it myself. I actually used my own savings to buy my very first one.
Yeah, similarly to you, I was 31. So I was probably about the same age when I bought my first rental property.
Compounding real estate is just another concept like compounding interest. So once Danille bought her first rental, she just had one source of income, one return, and it was about $300 or $400 a month. Then her second one was $300 or $400 a month. And now she's got, let's say, $700 or $800 coming in. Now she's able to use that to be able to buy more. So that's what we mean by compounding real estate. The other thing that's cool about that is your tenants are actually paying off your debt. Your tenants are paying the mortgage down. They're paying it through rent, but then you're using that to pay your operating expenses and your debt down. These individual rentals ultimately get paid down by your own customer.
And I think it's also important to note that there's trapped equity in real estate too that you can then compound. So if you buy something like my first condo was $160,000, it's now worth $375,000. So I can refinance that and take that $200,000 out and put it towards a different rental, so that the equity is no longer trapped. So that also compounds, your cash flow or how many you can purchase.
So the cool part about that story is that when you do a cash out refi, it's actually tax-free because you're actually not selling anything. You're using debt. So the debt is actually going into your pocket.
So then when you have that cash out refi, then you can buy another deal. So the more and more properties you get under your belt, as they appreciate, you can start to pull out that trapped equity through that cash out refi and buy additional properties. So don't feel frustrated if you're sitting there saving up for your first rental or even your second rental and thinking this is taking so long, I'm never going to be able to get more than 2 or 3 at this rate. It's going to exponentially change for you once you have those 2 rental properties.
Yep. You just got to start with momentum. You got to start with one and generate some momentum. And then that momentum gets faster and faster as you continue. If you have not yet bought your first rental property, we just made a step-by-step tutorial on how you can buy your first rental property in the next 6 months.